We're all worried about political polarization. But what exactly is it? It's important to distinguish three different things we might be talking about: attitude polarization, ideological sorting, and affective polarization. Attitude polarization is what we're familiar with. It means that people are getting more extreme and further apart in their political opinions. Ideological sorting, on the other hand, means that people within each party tend to increasingly agree with each other and to disagree with those on the other side on pretty much every issue, even when those issues seem unrelated. So, for example, 40 years ago, you couldn't predict someone's opinions on gun rights from their opinions on abortion rights, but now you can. Finally, affective polarization means that people increasingly dislike their political opponents. So, for example, the proportion of Democrats and Republicans with a very unfavorable view of the other side, that tripled from 1994 to 2022, from roughly 20% to roughly 60%. So, polarization is complicated, and obviously the causes and consequences of polarization are complicated. What might philosophy be able to contribute? Well, philosophers' advantage here is in thinking carefully about the normative questions that come up, about what we ought to do and to believe in an increasingly polarized world. In this video, I want to focus on one particular normative epistemological question, namely, does the fact that we're polarized suggest that we, or at least somebody, is being irrational? People often jump to that conclusion, but I think we should be cautious. First, the mere fact that people disagree, that's not a sign of irrationality. After all, people have extremely different political evidence. Now, evidence for political beliefs is amorphous and hard to pin down, but it's accumulated over a lifetime of experiences and conversations and media habits and whatnot. So if you and I have spent lifetimes in different social worlds and exposed to different media, it's no wonder we see things differently. Politics is just complicated. Now, what about the fact that people often interpret the same evidence differently in ways that fit with their prior beliefs? Now, that tendency, it's often thought to be irrational and sometimes called confirmation bias. It's actually what we should expect from rational people. The reason is that evidence is never received in a vacuum. Its significance always depends on your background knowledge. So, if you and I disagree about how trustworthy Tucker Carlson is, for example, then we should react differently when he claims that Kamala Harris is a radical leftist. So, the mere fact that people disagree or they interpret evidence differently is not good evidence for irrationality. Still, there's something fishy about polarization. What could it be? Here's an idea. People's political beliefs seem to move in surprisingly predictable ways. We're all aware of this fact at some level. We know that changing our social circle or our news diet will likely shift what we end up believing. So if you want to become more panicked about climate change, here's what you do. Read only the most dire doomsday reports. If you want to become more optimistic about climate change, here's what you do. Read the latest books on the progress of green technology. Now, according to standard epistemological theories, this sort of predictable persuasion must be irrational. And the basic idea behind these theories is this. Suppose you know you're only reading the optimistic climate reports. Then you know that your evidence is being presented in a selective way, and so you therefore should give it less weight than you would otherwise. And as long as you trust yourself to do this properly, you should expect that you won't be persuaded by what you see unless the case for optimism turns out to be better than you expected. Here's the kicker. If you're rational, you obviously can't expect the arguments to be better than you expect, so you can't expect to be persuaded by them. Nevertheless, in the real world, people are often predictably persuaded by the arguments they hear or the media they listen to and the social circles they inhabit. So does that mean that they're being irrational and that the polarization that comes from this is due to irrationality? It might, but I think that's too quick. I think actually there are scenarios where those standard epistemological theories are wrong, and it can be rational to be predictably persuaded. In particular, I've argued in my research that this can happen when your evidence is asymmetrically ambiguous. Evidence is ambiguous when it's hard to know what to make of, and it's asymmetrically ambiguous if it's easy to tell when it does support a conclusion and hard to tell when it doesn't support a conclusion. So when I tune into Tucker Carlson's show, I expect that the reasons supporting his position will be presented in a clear and convincing way. The arguments will make a lot of sense. On the other hand, the reasons against his position, the objections to it, will be presented in a way that's hard to know what to make of, hard to know what to conclude from. He's going to have all sorts of counter responses and so on. So on the whole, I expect that I'm going to be presented with some clear evidence in favor and some ambiguous evidence against, and so I might be slightly persuaded. By the way, that's one of the reasons I don't watch his show. I worry that he's rationally going to persuade me, at least a little bit. If I'm right about this, then when our evidence is asymmetrically ambiguous, we can often rationally expect to be persuaded. and so even predictable polarization might be due to rational causes. In short, it's hard to get clear evidence in favor of the irrationality of polarization. Now, you might be wondering, okay, but why does it matter? Does it matter whether polarization is rational or not? I think it does. Affective polarization, which is dislike of the other side, is one of the biggest problems with polarization, and it's tightly linked to our beliefs about rationality. If we think our political opponents are irrational, then we're just more likely to blame them for their actions or dislike them for their beliefs. After all, we think they should know better. On the other hand, if we think they've been rational but misled, then that opens the door to a more empathetic and potentially constructive approach to our political disagreements. And I think that seeing the other side as rational might in turn be one piece of a solution to our increasing polarization.